In the grim darkness of the far future, there are tombs that walk. Not the Necron crypts of living metal, but something equally ancient and infinitely more tragic. These are the Dreadnoughts, massive war machines that house the shattered remains of Space Marine heroes, warriors too valuable to let die, too broken to live. They sleep away the centuries in sacred halls, tended by tech marines who whisper prayers over adamantium shells, waiting for the day when war calls them to wake once more. But what happens when one of these ancient warriors never makes it back to those hallowed chambers? What becomes of a dreadnought lost on some forgotten battlefield, its stasis systems locked in perpetual hibernation, while the galaxy turns and burns around it? And what transpires when the most dangerous scavengers in the universe, the Orks, stumble upon this ancient killing machine and decide it would make a proper addition to their WAG? This is a story that embodies everything that makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling. It's a collision between the Imperium's reverence for the past and the Orks' irreverent present. It's a meeting of ancient nobility and primal savagery. It's the moment when 75 centuries of forced slumber end not with ceremony and respect, but with the crude enthusiasm of greenskins who see everything as either a fight or something to loot, most likely both. Imagine the scene, a dead world scoured by orbital bombardment during conflicts so ancient that the very names of the combatants have been lost to Imperial records. The ruins of a fortress monastery stand like broken teeth against a dust-choked sky. Everything organic has long since turned to ash and dust. The metal has oxidized into rust and ruin. But deep in the vaults, beneath collapsed stone and twisted metal, something endures. A dreadnought sarcophagus, its adamantium shell scarred by weapons that haven't been manufactured in millennia, its power systems operating on the barest trickle of energy, maintaining the life of the Space Marine sealed within its core. This warrior fell in battle when the Imperium was younger, when the scars of the Horus heresy were still fresh wounds rather than ancient history. He fought alongside brothers whose gene seed has been passed down through dozens of generations. The enemies he faced are now the subject of historical treatises. The tactics he mastered have been refined and replaced 100 times over. He went to sleep expecting to wake for the next battle, perhaps a few months or years later. Instead, 7,500 years have passed, 75 centuries. Empires have risen and fallen. Entire Space Marine chapters have been founded, fought for millennia, and been declared lost to the last man. The galaxy he knew has transformed beyond recognition. And now, the lumbering footfalls of Orks echo through the ruins above him, their guttural voices raised in excitement as they search for salvage. They've come to this dead world, following the trail of an ancient war, hoping to find weapons, armor, anything useful. What they're about to discover is something far more dangerous than mere salvage. They're about to wake something that should have remained sleeping, something that will not take kindly to being disturbed by Xenos, and something that possesses enough firepower to level everything within a kilometer radius. The Orks don't know it yet, but they're about to learn a fundamental truth about the Imperium of man. The Imperium never truly forgets its warriors. It just puts them to sleep and waits. The nature of the Dreadnought. To understand what the Orks are about to unleash, we need to understand exactly what a Dreadnought is. These are not simple robots or automated war machines. They're not servitors with guns bolted to their chassis. A Dreadnought is something far more complex and far more terrible. It's a fusion of warrior and weapon, a marriage of flesh and machine that goes beyond anything the Mechanicus achieves with their standard augmentation procedures. When a Space Marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even their enhanced physiology cannot heal them, when their body is broken beyond what the apothecaries can repair, they face a choice. Most would welcome death, the final rest after a life of war. But for the greatest heroes, for those whose experience and valor are deemed too valuable to lose, the chapter offers another path: entombment. The warrior's broken body is encased in an armored sarcophagus filled with amniotic fluids, connected to life support systems that will sustain their organic functions indefinitely. This sarcophagus is then installed in the heart of a Dreadnought chassis, a towering war machine standing 3 to 4 meters tall, weighing several tons, and armed with enough weaponry to destroy entire squads of enemy soldiers. The neural interface connects directly to the Space Marine's brain, allowing them to control the Dreadnought as they once controlled their own body. They see through optical sensors, hear through audio pickups, and feel through pressure sensors distributed across the chassis. Their original body, what remains of it, is curled in a fetal position deep within the sarcophagus, reduced to little more than a torso and head, kept alive by machines that breathe for them, that pump nutrients directly into their bloodstream, that filter their waste and maintain their cellular functions. It is, in every meaningful sense, a living tomb. The pilot cannot leave, cannot eat, cannot drink, cannot feel the touch of another human being. They exist in a state of suspended animation between battles, locked in dreamless sleep within stasis fields that slow their perception of time to a crawl. When they wake, it's for war. When the war ends, they sleep again. Decades can pass in what feels like moments. Centuries blur together into a continuous sequence of awakening, fighting, and returning to darkness. The psychological toll is immense. Extended neural interface with a vehicle as large and complex as a Dreadnought causes mental stress that accumulates over time. Lethargy, confusion, dyschronometria, the inability to properly perceive time, and even senility can set in. The organic brain begins to degrade, not from age, but from the sheer unnaturalness of its existence. Memories fade, personality erodes, the human aspects of the warrior slowly leach away until what remains is more weapon than man, more machine than marine. This is why Dreadnoughts are put to sleep between battles. The amniotic fluids and neural systems that preserve the pilot will degenerate if the warrior remains conscious for extended periods. The stasis sleep isn't just to preserve the machine, it's to preserve what little remains of the man inside. Every awakening takes something from them. Every battle erodes another piece of their humanity. Eventually, even the most resilient pilot will fade entirely, leaving only the Dreadnought, still functioning, still fighting, but empty of anything that could be called alive. The oldest Dreadnoughts are revered as living relics. Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves has been in service for over 10,000 years, since the time of the Horus Heresy itself. He knew the Primarchs. He fought beside Lemon Russ. He remembers the Emperor before the throne. But even Bjorn admits to the loneliness, to the weight of millennia pressing down on his consciousness. He sleeps for decades, or even centuries at a time, awakened only for the most dire circumstances, because every moment of wakefulness takes him further from what he was and closer to becoming nothing more than an echo in a machine. The Dreadnought, our Orks are about to discover, has been asleep for 7,500 years. Not in the controlled environment of a chapter's fortress monastery, not tended by tech marines who perform daily rituals of maintenance and preservation, not surrounded by battle brothers who visit to pay their respects and receive counsel. This Dreadnought has been abandoned, its stasis systems locked in emergency mode, its power reserves slowly depleting, its neural systems attempting to preserve the pilot within against odds that grow worse with each passing century. The warrior inside has been effectively frozen in time, his consciousness suspended at the moment of his last battle. He doesn't know that 7,500 years have passed. He can't know. His perception of time ended when the stasis field activated, and it won't resume until something disrupts that field and brings his systems back online. When he wakes, if he wakes, it will be as if no time has passed at all. He'll expect to see his battle brothers. He'll expect to receive orders from commanders who died millennia ago. He'll be looking for enemies that no longer exist, in a war that has long since been forgotten by everyone except the dustiest archives of the Administratum. The technology keeping him alive is itself a relic. Dreadnought construction is a lost art. The Knowledge required to build new chassis has degraded into ritualized mythology. Every existing dreadnought is precious beyond measure, maintained through a combination of sacred oils, prayer, and whatever actual technical knowledge the tech marines can piece together from ancient texts. The older patterns, the Contemptor, the Deredeo, the Leviathan, these are even rarer, artifacts from the Great Crusade that represent pinnacles of technology the modern Imperium can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. Our ancient dreadnought is likely one of these older patterns, perhaps a Contemptor, built during the Great Crusade when the Emperor still walked among men. Its reactor core might be one of the old atomantic generators, capable of running for millennia on a single charge. Its weapons could be relics themselves, master-crafted pieces that have no modern equivalent. Its armor might be alloyed with materials that the Mechanicus no longer knows how to produce. Everything about it represents knowledge that humanity has lost, technology that exists now only as examples to be preserved and venerated, never to be truly understood again. Inside that magnificent, terrible machine is a space marine who has been dead to the world for longer than some civilizations have existed. His chapter might still endure, or it might have been declared excommunicate traitorous and purged from existence. His Primarch might have returned during the Indomitus Crusade, or might still be lost, or might have fallen to chaos during the heresy. The Imperium he swore to defend has changed in ways he cannot possibly imagine. The enemies he trained to fight have evolved, adapted, been replaced by new threats. Even the way war is waged has transformed. The Codex Astartes has been refined. New marks of power armor have been developed. The Primaris Marines have been introduced. Everything is different, but he doesn't know any of this. He is suspended in a moment 7,500 years in the past, waiting for an awakening that was supposed to come days or weeks later, not after the passage of 75 centuries. And when the Orks inadvertently trigger his reactivation sequence, when his consciousness comes rushing back and his optical sensors flicker to life, the first thing he's going to see is not the familiar halls of his fortress monastery or the concerned faces of his tech marines. He's going to see Orks. Dozens of them, crawling all over his chassis, trying to pry open his hull with crude tools, speaking in their brutal, guttural language about how this Yumi box is going to make a proper good gun platform once they get him out and bolt some more Dakar onto it. The awakening is not going to be pleasant for anyone involved. 7.5 millennia of silence. To fully grasp the magnitude of 7,500 years, we need to put it in perspective. When this dreadnought fell and was sealed in stasis, the Imperium was a fundamentally different entity. If he was interred during the early period, following the Horus heresy, during the scouring when the traitor legions were being driven into the Eye of Terror, then he comes from a time when the wounds of betrayal were still fresh and bleeding. The Space Marine legions were in the process of being broken down into chapters according to the Codex Astartes. The Imperial cult was still consolidating its power. The Primarchs were still disappearing one by one, their fates unknown. In the 7,500 years since then, the Imperium has fought countless wars. The War of the Beast saw Orks nearly destroy Terra itself, forcing the creation of the Death Watch and necessitating massive military reforms. The Age of Apostasy saw the Imperium tear itself apart from within as Gojivan Daira's madness drove the ecclesiarchy to unprecedented excesses of power. The Tyrannic Wars brought an entirely new Xenos threat, a devouring swarm from beyond the galaxy that defied everything the Imperium thought it knew about alien life. The 13th Black Crusade shattered Cadia and tore the galaxy in half with the Great Rift. Entire Space Marine chapters have been founded, fought for thousands of years, and been destroyed in that time. The Lamenters, cursed with terrible luck, have endured penitence crusades that would break lesser chapters. The Celestial Lions were nearly annihilated by the Inquisition. The Astral Claws turned traitor and became the Red Corsairs. Hundreds of chapters have been lost to warp storms, Tyrannid invasions, Ork wages, and countless other disasters. New chapters have been founded in their place, carrying on the eternal war against the enemies of mankind. The technology the Imperium possesses has degraded further. More STCs have been lost. More knowledge has slipped into mythology and superstition. The Mechanicus clings to rituals whose original purposes are no longer understood. What was considered standard equipment in our Dreadnought's time might now be revered as holy relics. The weapons he carries might be considered priceless artifacts. His very existence represents a link to a time when the Imperium still remembered how to do things properly, before the long slide into decay and degradation. But while the Imperium has been slowly declining, the enemies of mankind have been growing stronger. The Orks have launched wag after wag, each one bringing new destruction. Gazgkul Mag Uruk Thraka has risen to become the most dangerous Ork warlord in the galaxy, potentially on the path to becoming the next beast. Chaos has been building its strength in the Eye of Terror, preparing for the return that would eventually manifest as the 13th Black Crusade. The Necrons have been slowly awakening from their 60-million-year slumber, bringing technology so advanced it makes even the Dark Age of technology look primitive. Inside his sarcophagus, our Dreadnought knows none of this. His last memories are of the battle that claimed his original body. Perhaps he was struck down by a Chaos Champion's power, sword, the blade cutting through his armor and spine in a single terrible stroke. Perhaps he was caught in an explosion, his legs shattered, his lungs filled with promethium fire. Perhaps he stood his ground against impossible odds, holding a critical position until reinforcements could arrive, taking dozens of wounds that would have killed a normal human instantly, but that his space marine physiology kept him conscious through, right up until his body finally gave out and he collapsed, still clutching his bolter. The apothecaries would have reached him quickly. In those early years, the chapters were still learning the full extent of their duties. The procedures for interment in a Dreadnought were being refined with each warrior who required them. They would have worked swiftly, stabilizing his injuries, placing him in an emergency stasis field, transporting him back to the fortress monastery where the Tech Marines had already begun preparing the Dreadnought chassis that would become his new body. The interment ceremony would have been solemn. His brothers would have gathered to witness his rebirth. The chaplains would have spoken prayers of dedication. The Tech Marines would have activated the neural interface for the first time, and our warrior would have felt his consciousness expand beyond the limits of his organic body, reaching out into the machine, learning to see through optical sensors, to hear through audio receivers, to manipulate massive adamantium limbs as he once controlled his original arms and legs. His first missions would have been triumphs. A Dreadnought on the battlefield is a sight that inspires awe and terror in equal measure, towering over even his Terminator-armored brothers, armed with weapons that could reduce a tank to scrap metal. He would have waded into enemy formations like a walking apocalypse. His assault cannon would have torn through enemy infantry by the score. His power fist would have crushed everything it touched. He would have felt invincible, unstoppable, a weapon forged from his own broken body and tempered in the fires of his determination to continue serving the Emperor. But then came the battle that left him abandoned. Perhaps it was a desperate rearguard action on a dying world. Perhaps his chapter was overwhelmed by superior numbers and forced to retreat, unable to retrieve his fallen form. Perhaps a warp storm separated him from his brothers, or orbital bombardment buried him beneath a fortress's collapsing walls. Perhaps treachery was involved, or simple miscommunication, or the chaos of war making recovery impossible. Whatever the cause, his last conscious thought before the stasis field activated would have been confusion. Why weren't his brothers responding to his vox calls? Where were the Tech Marines who should be initiating recovery protocols? Why was his power supply dropping so rapidly? And then, as emergency systems kicked in and stasis protocols engaged, darkness would have taken him, not the the darkness of sleep or unconsciousness, but the absolute void of suspended time, his neurons frozen mid-fire, his thoughts incomplete, his awareness simply ceasing to exist. 7,500 years. In stasis, it would feel like no time at all. One moment he's falling into darkness, the next he's waking up. But his systems haven't been in proper stasis the entire time. They can't have been. True stasis requires specific conditions and enormous amounts of power. His reactor, powerful as it is, has been operating in minimal power mode for millennia, keeping his organic components alive, maintaining the neural interface, preserving the bare minimum of functionality. The stasis field has been flickering, failing and reactivating, in a cycle that has repeated millions of times over the centuries. Each failure, each moment when the stasis field drops and his consciousness begins to return only to be forced back into suspension, causes damage. His memories have been fragmenting, neural pathways have been degrading, the organic portions of his brain have been aging despite the preservation systems, not at a normal rate, but far faster than they should in true stasis. The man he was has been slowly eroding away, like a statue worn down by eons of wind and sand. His chassis hasn't fared much better. Adamantium doesn't rust, but nothing is truly indestructible. Microfractures have developed in the armor plating. Lubricants have dried out or separated. Electronic components have developed faults from the sheer passage of time. His weapons, master-crafted relics that they are, have experienced wear at the molecular level. The machine spirits that some believe inhabit all technology have been sleeping as long as he has, and who knows if they will wake properly when power is restored. The fortress around him has decayed into ruin. Whatever battle claimed this world ended with its surface scoured clean. The walls have collapsed. The gene seed vaults have been breached and emptied by time and decomposition. The sacred texts in the librarium have turned to dust. The armor in the reclusium has corroded beyond recognition. Everything that made this place a fortress monastery has been reduced to rubble and rust. Only the deepest vaults have survived, and even they are filled with debris. Their ceilings cracked, their seals broken, their sanctity violated by the simple, relentless pressure of geological time. And now the Orks have come. They're not the first scavengers to pick through these ruins. Over the millennia, others have surely explored this place. Perhaps Chaos cultists sought relics from the Imperium's past. Perhaps Eldar corsairs looked for archaeotech to sell or study. Perhaps human salvage crews from nearby systems tried to recover anything useful. But none of them found what lies beneath the rubble. None of them had the determination to dig deep enough, or the raw physical strength to move the fallen stone, or the willingness to venture into areas where the walls might collapse at any moment. The Orks have all of these qualities and more. They don't care about danger. They don't worry about structural integrity. They dig with their bare hands if they have to, and what their hands can't move, their crude machinery can. They're searching for salvage, for weapons, for anything they can loot and repurpose for their wag. And they're about to find the greatest prize on this entire dead world, something far more valuable than any weapon they could have imagined. They're about to find a sleeping god of war, and they're going to wake it up. The Greenskin Menace. To understand what happens when the Orks find our Dreadnought, we need to understand the Orks themselves. These aren't the sophisticated alien civilizations of science fiction, with their advanced technology and complex cultures. Orks are the antithesis of sophistication. They're savage, brutal, and seemingly primitive. But beneath that crude exterior lies something far more dangerous than it first appears. Orks are a biologically engineered species, created millennia ago during the War in Heaven by the Old Ones as weapons against the Necrons and their Satan masters. The Old Ones designed them to be the perfect warriors, self-sustaining, rapidly reproducing, inherently violent, and possessing an instinctive understanding of technology. They were meant to fight endlessly, to overwhelm their enemies through sheer numbers and ferocity, to never give up no matter the odds. The war in heaven ended millions of years ago, but the Orks remain. They've spread across the galaxy like a green plague, establishing themselves on thousands of worlds, forming massive wags that crash against the borders of every civilized species. They fight because fighting is what they were made to do. It's not about conquest or resources or ideology. It's about the simple, primal joy they take in violence. An orc in battle is an orc at peace with himself and the universe. Their biology is equally strange and formidable. They're not truly animals, despite their appearance. They're a hybrid of animal and fungus, reproducing through spores that they release constantly throughout their lives, and especially when they die. Kill an orc, and you've potentially seeded an entire planet with the means to create more orcs. The spores grow into various forms of life. Some become orcs, the warriors and rulers of their kind. Others become Gretchen, smaller and weaker creatures who serve as laborers and cannon fodder. Still others become snotlings, even tinier beings that function as little more than pets and ammunition. There are also the squigs, bizarre creatures that range from vicious attack beasts to living eating machines. The size of an orc correlates directly with its success in combat. The more an orc fights and wins, the larger and stronger it becomes. This creates a natural hierarchy where the biggest orcs are automatically the bosses, because they're the ones who have proven themselves in battle. The biggest of the big become war bosses, the leaders of entire tribes, or wags, and the biggest war boss becomes the warlord who can unite multiple tribes under his banner. But what makes orcs truly dangerous isn't their physical prowess, it's their relationship with the warp. Orcs generate a collective psychic field called the wag that grows stronger the more orcs gather together. This field doesn't just affect their morale and aggression, it affects reality itself in subtle but significant ways. The wag field makes orc technology work, when by all rights it shouldn't. Their guns are cobbled together from scrap metal and salvaged parts, with no standardization, no precision engineering, no understanding of the principles that make weapons function. And yet they work, because the orcs believe they will work, and the wah field makes that belief into reality. This is the fundamental paradox of orc technology. It's simultaneously crude and effective, ramshackle and reliable, stupid and brilliant. An orc mech boy can look at a pile of scrap and instinctively know how to assemble it into a functioning vehicle. They don't study engineering or physics. They don't need to understand torque or combustion or electrical circuits. They just know, on an instinctive level, encoded into their genetic structure, how to make things that go fast, shoot loud, and blow up good. The looters and death skulls are particularly enthusiastic about salvage. They scour battlefields for anything useful, from enemy weapons to vehicle parts to random bits of metal that might become useful later. They have an almost supernatural ability to find the best loot, and they're completely shameless about taking it. Finders keepers is a fundamental law of orc society, and if you can't hold on to your stuff, you don't deserve to keep it. When orcs loot Imperial technology, they make it orky. They add more weapons, more armor plating, more spikes and banners, and intimidating decorations. They paint it in their favorite colors, usually red for speed, blue for luck, or whatever else their particular clan prefers. They modify it according to their own understanding of how things work, which means bigger guns, louder engines, and a complete disregard for safety features or operational efficiency. The result is often barely recognizable as its original form, but it works, and it works in ways that would make an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest weep with frustration and envy. Looted vehicles are a staple of orc warfare. Looted Lehman Russ tanks painted in garish colors with additional guns welded onto every available surface. Looted rhinos converted into troop carriers with the entire top cut off and replaced with benches bolted directly to the chassis. Looted chimeras with their sophisticated targeting systems ripped out and replaced with a big red button that makes the guns fire faster. Even titans have been looted on rare occasions. Massive war machines taller than buildings, painted in Ork colors and crewed by Gretchen, who barely understand how to work the controls. The Orks who are about to discover our Dreadnought are likely part of a relatively small warband, perhaps 100 or so boys, led by a nob or a minor war boss. They've come to this dead world because word spread through the Greenskin network that there were good fighting and better looting to be found here. Maybe they fought a few battles against other Ork warbands also seeking salvage. Maybe they had to clear out some local wildlife that had grown dangerous. But now they've exhausted the easy pickings on the surface, and they're delving deeper, into the ruins themselves, looking for the really good stuff that other scavengers might have missed. The mech boy with them is probably named something like Klodgit Spanavrek or Bolt Basher Mekstaba, and he's got a good eye for useful scrap. He's the one who insisted they dig deeper into the ruins, because his mech sense told him there was something worth having down there. The other Orks grumbled about it, because digging isn't as fun as fighting, but the promise of good loot was enough to get them working. They've been at it for days now, clearing rubble, shoring up unstable passages with whatever materials they can find, arguing constantly about who's doing more work and who deserves the biggest share of whatever they find. Gretchen scurry back and forth, hauling smaller pieces of debris, occasionally getting crushed when a wall collapses, or squeezed when two larger Orks decide the passage isn't wide enough for both of them. And then, finally, they break through into a chamber that has remained sealed for 7,500 years. The air that rushes out is stale and cold, untouched by wind or weather since before the oldest Ork in the group was born. The walls inside are adamantium, barely corroded, still bearing the markings of the chapter that once called this place home. And in the center of the chamber, partially buried under debris that fell from the ceiling, sits something that makes every Ork stop and stare. It's a Dreadnought. They don't know what it's called, of course. They've probably never seen one before, but they know a proper war machine when they see one. It's big, armored, and covered in weapons. One arm ends in what's clearly a massive gun of some kind. The other is a power fist large enough to crush a space marine in full armor. There are targeting systems, armor plating thick enough to stop a battle cannon shell, and a reactor that, if they could get it working, would power a dozen of their own vehicles. Kludgit approaches carefully, his mech vision already analyzing the potential. "Dis," he says, his voice filled with reverence and greed in equal measure. "Is proper good loot, dis is." The other Orks crowd around, offering suggestions that range from, "Let's just shoot it and see what happens," to, "I bet we could strap more guns on it," to, "Maybe there's a Yumi inside. We can crump." What none of them realize is that their very presence, their movement, their voices echoing in this chamber for the first time in millennia, is being detected by systems that have been waiting in the darkness. Systems that are designed to identify threats. Systems that are beginning, slowly, to wake up. The Dreadnought's reactor, operating on the barest minimum power for 7,500 years, registers the vibrations. Acoustic sensors pick up voices. Pressure sensors detect the weight of multiple individuals standing on the chamber floor. Optical sensors, in minimal power mode, detect movement and heat signatures. All of this data is fed to the Dreadnought's machine spirit, to the semi-autonomous control systems that manage the chassis when the pilot is in stasis. And those systems, following protocols established millennia ago, begin to interpret the data. Multiple unknowns in close proximity, unauthorized personnel in a restricted area, no response to identification friend or foe, interrogation signals, unknown language patterns. Conclusion is reached quickly. Threat detected. Initiate awakening sequence. Prepare for combat operations. Somewhere deep inside the sarcophagus, where organic tissue has been preserved in amniotic fluid for longer than some civilizations have existed, neurons begin to fire. Synapses that have been frozen in stasis start to activate. A consciousness that has been suspended for 7,500 years begins, slowly, to return to awareness. The Orks, meanwhile, have started arguing about the best way to get the Dreadnought out of the rubble so they can take it back to their workshop. Some want to attach chains and drag it with their vehicles. Others suggest just clearing away the debris, piece by piece. Kludgit is examining the chassis closely, trying to figure out where the good bits are and how to disconnect them without breaking anything important. None of them notice the subtle change in the Dreadnought's stance, the way its weight shifts slightly as hydraulic systems that have been locked for millennia begin to move, the way its optical sensors adjust focus, sweeping across the chamber with increasing precision, the way its weapons systems begin their activation sequences, power building in capacitors that haven't held a charge in longer than any of the Orks have been alive. One of the Gretchen, braver or stupider than the others, actually climbs up onto the Dreadnought's chassis. He's looking for a way to pry open the armor plates, thinking maybe there's something valuable inside. His clawed hands find purchase on the scarred adamantium, and he pulls himself up, chattering excitedly about what he's going to tell the other Gretchen when he gets back. That's when the Dreadnought's optical sensor swivels to focus directly on him. That's when the ancient warrior inside, consciousness returning after an eternity of darkness, sees the first thing he's seen in 7,500 years. It's a Gretchen, a small, green, ugly Xenos creature, crawling on his sacred chassis like some kind of vermin, and behind it, dozens more greenskins, all of them touching his armor, examining his weapons, speaking in their crude language about their plans for him. For a moment, there's absolute silence in the warrior's mind as his brain struggles to process what he's seeing. This isn't right. Where are his brothers? Where are the tech marines? Why are there Xenos in what should be a sacred space? What's happened? How long has it been? The questions don't matter. Training and conditioning override confusion. Threat assessment is automatic. Multiple Xenos contacts, unknown type. Immediate response required. The Emperor protects, but the Emperor also expects his warriors to do their part. And this warrior has been sleeping for far, far too long. Deep in the Dreadnought's reactor, power levels begin to spike. Weapon systems complete their activation sequences. Targeting solutions are calculated. The assault cannon mounted on one arm begins to rotate. Ancient mechanisms moving smoothly despite millennia of inactivity. Barrels aligning with their first targets. Kludjit is the first to notice something's wrong. His mech sense, that instinctive understanding of machinery that all mech boys possess, screams a warning. The power readings he's been sensing from the Dreadnought have just spiked dramatically. Something inside the machine has just activated, and it's drawing enormous amounts of energy very quickly. "Oi!" he shouts, backing away quickly. "I think this thing's waking up!" The other Orks look at him, confused. Then they look at the Dreadnought. Then they see what he sees. The optical sensors glowing with internal light. The slight movements of the chassis as servos engage. The sound, barely audible at first, but growing louder, of an assault cannon spinning up to firing speed. The Gretchen on top of the Dreadnought realizes his mistake approximately 1 second before it's too late to do anything about it. He tries to jump clear, squealing in terror, but he's not fast enough. The Dreadnought's other arm, the one tipped with a massive power fist, moves with shocking speed for something so large. It catches the Gretchen in midair, adamantium fingers closing around the creature's torso, and then the power field activates, and there's a wet crunch, and the Gretchen simply ceases to exist as a coherent organism. Then the assault cannon opens fire, and the chamber fills with thunder and death. The Awakening. The Dreadnought's assault cannon is a masterwork of destructive engineering. It fires mass reactive rounds, each one roughly equivalent to a bolt pistol shell, at a rate of hundreds per minute. When these shells impact a target, they penetrate a short distance before detonating, tearing apart flesh, armor, and machinery from the inside. Against infantry, especially unarmored or lightly armored infantry, the assault cannon is nothing less than apocalyptic. The first burst cuts through 3 Orks before they even realize what's happening. The shells punch through their crude armor like it's paper, exploding inside their torsos and turning their internal organs into slurry. They're dead before they hit the ground, their bodies torn apart by the force of the detonations. The Orks behind them catch shrapnel and secondary fragments, crying out in pain and surprise as they're peppered with bits of their former comrades and shattered ceramite. The chamber, which moments ago was filled with the excited chatter of Orks discussing their loot, transforms into a killing ground. The Dreadnought's targeting systems, ancient but still functional, are tracking multiple targets simultaneously. The assault cannon swivels smoothly from one orc to the next, each burst precisely calibrated to maximum efficiency. There's no wasted ammunition, no random spray and pray. Every shell finds a target, and every target dies. The orc's initial shock lasts perhaps 2 seconds. Then their biology and psychology kick in. Orcs don't flee from danger. They don't panic. When faced with something trying to kill them, their response is simple and instinctive. They try to kill it first. Battle cries erupt from dozens of green throats simultaneously. Wag! They roar, the sound echoing off the adamantium walls. Psychic energy beginning to build as their collective consciousness focuses on the fight. Those with guns start shooting. Sluggers bark, firing crude solid rounds that spark off the Dreadnought's armor without penetrating. Big shooters open up, heavier weapons that actually have a chance of doing damage. But the Dreadnought is moving now, lumbering forward out of the debris that had partially buried it, and moving targets are harder to hit even at close range. The few orcs with rockets desperately try to aim and fire, but in the confined space of the chamber, there's as much chance of hitting their own boys as there is of hitting the Dreadnought. The ones without guns, or those too excited to bother shooting, charge directly at the Dreadnought with their choppers raised. This is their natural response to any threat. Get close, get choppy, overwhelm it with sheer ferocity. It works against most enemies. It's worked for them countless times before. The problem is that Dreadnoughts aren't most enemies. The first orc to reach melee range swings his chopper with all his considerable strength, aiming for what looks like a joint in the Dreadnought's leg armor. The blade connects, and for a moment, the orc feels a surge of triumph. Then the blade shatters. Adamantium doesn't care about crude orc metallurgy. The chopper breaks into pieces, and before the orc can even register what happened, the Dreadnought's power fist comes down like the hammer of an angry god. The impact drives the orc straight into the floor with enough force that his body actually leaves an impression in the ferrocrete. The power field around the fist reduces him to a broken pile of organic matter and shattered bone. The Dreadnought lifts its fist, and what's left of the orc slides off in wet chunks. More orcs pile on, because that's what orcs do. They dogpile threats. If one orc can't kill it, 10 orcs can. If 10 can't, 100 can. They swarm over the Dreadnought like ants on a beetle, stabbing at joints, trying to pry open armor plates, shooting at point-blank range directly into sensor arrays and weapon mounts. Some of them actually manage to do minor damage. A lucky shot from a rocket launcher knocks out one of the optical sensors. A particularly strong knob manages to wedge his power claw into a seam in the armor and tear off a small section of plating. But these are minor victories, and they come at tremendous cost. The Dreadnought is functionally immune to most of what the orcs can do to it. Their weapons aren't powerful enough. Their strength isn't sufficient, and the Dreadnought has millennia of combat experience encoded into its systems, experience that's being applied with ruthless efficiency. Inside the sarcophagus, the pilot's consciousness is fully active now. The shock of awakening has passed, replaced by the cold clarity of a space marine in combat. He still doesn't understand what's happened, doesn't know how long he's been asleep or where his brothers are, but those questions can wait. Right now, there are enemies, and enemies must be destroyed. The Emperor demands no less. His neural interface gives him perfect awareness of his chassis' status. He can feel the orcs clambering on his armor like ants on his skin. He can sense the damage they're inflicting, minor as it is. He can track their positions, their movements, their crude attempts at tactics, and he can respond with the accumulated skill of decades of warfare, enhanced by the superhuman processing power of a Space Marine's brain and the targeting systems of his Dreadnought chassis. He stamps down hard, crushing an orc under his foot. He sweeps his assault cannon in a wide arc, the sustained fire cutting through orcs like a scythe through wheat. He reaches out with his power fist, grabbing an orc that was trying to climb up his back, and hurls the greenskin across the chamber with enough force that the impact against the far wall turns the orc into paste. Every movement is economical, efficient, deadly. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourishes, just systematic, professional extermination. The Orks are learning, because Orks always learn, but they're learning too slowly. Some of them figure out that shooting at the joints might actually work and start concentrating their fire there. Others realize that the assault cannon has a reload cycle and try to rush in during the brief pauses when it's not firing. The Nob leading them bellows orders, trying to coordinate an attack that might actually threaten the Dreadnought. "Get around behind it," he roars. "Go for the legs! Bring it down!" The Dreadnought pilot hears this through his audio sensors, the words translated automatically by his chassis' systems from the Ork language into Gothic. The Nob is tactically sound in his thinking. Dreadnoughts can be brought down if you disable their locomotion, but the Nob is also making a fundamental error. He's assuming the Dreadnought will stand still and let itself be surrounded. The pilot has no intention of obliging. He's fought Orks before, during his first life, and during his time as a Dreadnought. He knows their tactics, their tendencies, their strengths and weaknesses. He knows they're resilient, numerous, and fearless. He knows they'll keep coming until every last one of them is dead. And he knows that fighting them in a confined space, where they can use their numbers to advantage, is tactically unsound. So he moves, not away from them, which would just encourage pursuit, but toward the chamber's entrance, the way the Orks came in. He advances like a walking fortress, assault cannon blazing, power fist crushing anyone foolish enough to get close. Orks die by the dozen, their bodies piling up in his wake, but more keep coming, because that's what Orks do. They don't retreat. They don't surrender. They fight until they win, or they die. Kludgit the mech boy, who's been hanging back and watching the fight with a combination of terror and professional interest, suddenly realizes what the Dreadnought is doing. "It's trying to get out," he shouts. "Don't let it get to the tunnels. If it gets into the open, we're all dead." He's absolutely right. In the confined space of the chamber, the Orks have at least some chance of overwhelming the Dreadnought through sheer numbers. In the tunnels, they'll be forced to come at it in a narrow front, and the assault cannon will cut them down before they can close. And if the Dreadnought reaches the surface, where it has room to maneuver, and the Orks can't dogpile it, the fight is over. The Orks surge forward in a desperate rush, trying to block the Dreadnought's path. The biggest among them, a massive Nob wielding a power claw and wearing armor that's more looted scrap than original construction, plants himself directly in the Dreadnought's way. "Come on then," he roars. "Let's see if you're as hard as you look." The Dreadnought doesn't slow down. It doesn't even pause. It just keeps advancing, assault cannon firing continuously, power fist raised. The Nob swings his power claw in a mighty arc, aiming for the Dreadnought's center mass, and the blow actually connects. The power field around the claw flares as it bites into the Dreadnought's armor, tearing through the outer layer and biting into the subsystems beneath. Sparks fly. Warning indicators light up in the pilot's awareness. The Nob has actually hurt him. Then the power fist descends, and the Nob learns why Dreadnoughts are feared across the galaxy. The impact is so powerful that the Nob's armor, his body, even his power claw, are crushed into a compacted mass of twisted metal and pulped flesh. The Dreadnought doesn't even slow down. It just steps over the remains and continues toward the entrance. A few Orks are smart enough or cowardly enough to try to flee at this point. They've seen enough. They know when they're beaten. They scramble for the tunnels, hoping to get out before the Dreadnought catches them. But Dreadnoughts don't let enemies escape if they can help it. The assault cannon tracks them, firing controlled bursts that bring them down one by one. No one leaves this chamber alive except the Dreadnought. The last few Orks, trapped against the walls with nowhere to run, sell their lives dearly. They charge in with wild battle cries, swinging their weapons with abandon, knowing they're going to die, but determined to take the enemy with them if they can. It's pointless, of course. The Dreadnought crushes them one by one, methodically, efficiently, until the chamber falls silent, except for the sound of its hydraulics and the gentle hum of its reactor. The pilot does a sensor sweep of the chamber, confirming that there are no remaining threats. Dozens of orc bodies lie scattered across the floor, torn apart by assault cannon fire or crushed by his power fist. The walls are scarred with bullet impacts and blast marks. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and spilled blood. It's a scene he's witnessed countless times before, in battles he can barely remember now. Victory. But as the adrenaline and combat stimulants begin to fade from his system, other thoughts intrude. Where is he? How did he get here? Where are his brothers? Why was he attacked by orcs in what should have been a secure location? He tries to access his comm systems, to hail his chapter, to request extraction and support. Static. No signals. No familiar Vox signatures. No Imperial channels broadcasting. Nothing. He examines his internal chronometer, the system that should tell him how long he's been in stasis. The numbers that come back make no sense. They indicate he's been offline for over 7,000 years. That can't be right. The system must be damaged. But when he runs diagnostics, everything checks out. The chronometer is working perfectly, which means, no, it's impossible. 7.5 millennia. His entire chapter could have died and been forgotten in that time. The war he was fighting could have ended thousands of years ago. Everything he knew could be gone. Everyone he fought beside could be dust and forgotten memories. The very Imperium he swore to defend could have changed beyond recognition. The pilot forces these thoughts down. Speculation is useless. He needs information. He needs to reach Imperial forces, to report in, to find out what's happened and where he's needed now. He begins moving toward the surface, his sensors scanning for any indication of civilized activity, any sign that he's not completely alone on this dead world. Behind him, in the chamber of death he's leaving, something stirs among the corpses. Because orcs are tough, and sometimes, even when you're sure you've killed them all, you haven't quite succeeded. The survivor's Kludget Spanavrek, mech boy extraordinaire, knows that he's not dead yet, and he intends to keep it that way for as long as possible. When the shooting started, his survival instincts kicked in immediately. While the other orcs charged the Dreadnought or tried to shoot it, Kludget dove behind a particularly large piece of fallen debris and made himself as small and inconspicuous as a full-grown orc can manage. It's not the orkiest thing to do, and if any of his boys were still alive, they'd probably give him grief about it. But he reckons being alive and un-orky is better than being dead and proper. He waits until he's absolutely certain the Dreadnought has left before emerging from his hiding spot. His ears are ringing from the assault cannon fire. His eyes are watering from the smoke and cordite. But he's alive, and more importantly, he's had several minutes to think about what he just witnessed. That Yumi war machine is proper scary, no doubt about it. Killed damn near the entire warband without breaking a sweat, or whatever Yumis do when they get tired. But it's also exactly what Kludget has been looking for. All that power, all that technology, all that lovely shooty and stompy potential. If he could just figure out how it works, if he could just get inside that adamantium shell and see what makes it tick, he could build something amazing. The biggest, best Def Dread the WH has ever seen. Maybe even better than a Def Dread. Maybe something entirely new. Of course, first he has to survive long enough to actually do any of that. And he has to figure out how to track the Dreadnought, how to get close to it again without getting killed, and how to crack it open like a particularly tough squig. These are not trivial problems. He starts picking his way through the corpses, checking to see if any of the other boys might have survived. Most of them are very clearly dead. The Dreadnought was extremely thorough, but orcs are notoriously hard to kill, and sometimes even the most devastating injuries can be survived if the orc is tough enough and lucky enough. He finds one orc, a massive brute named Scarblast, who's missing an arm and has a hole in his torso you could fit a grot through, but is somehow still breathing. The wound is cauterizing itself already, the orc's biology working overtime to keep him from bleeding out. Kludget debates whether to help or just finish him off and loot his gear. Then he decides that having backup, even badly injured backup, is better than being completely alone. "Oi," he says, kicking Scarblast in the leg. "You dead?" Scarblast's eyes snap open. "What?" he growls, then looks down at his injuries. Oh, that's not good. Can you walk? Maybe. Give me a minute. Scarblast struggles to his feet, swaying dangerously. He looks around at the carnage, at all the dead orcs, and a slow grin spreads across his face. Dat was a proper good scrap, dat was. We got crumped, Cludget points out. Yeah, but we put up a fight first. Dat counts for something. Scarblast pokes at the hole in his torso experimentally. Gonna need a dock to fix this. Nearest dock is back at the settlement, 2 days' march from here. Then I guess we better get moving. Scarblast looks around. Where'd that stompy Yumi thing go? Toward the surface, probably trying to get out of the ruins. Good. I don't fancy another go at it just yet. Scarblast pauses. Though when I'm patched up, I wouldn't mind a rematch. Gotta get even for the boys it killed. Cludget's mind is working furiously. 2 days back to the settlement. Gather more boys. Maybe convince a proper war boss to come back with them. Track down the Dreadnought before it gets too far away. That's a lot of time for things to go wrong, but it's the only plan he's got. Then another thought occurs to him. Wait, if we go back and tell the boss we found a stompy Yumi war machine and it crumped almost everyone, he's gonna think we're weak. Might decide he don't need a weak mech boy around anymore. Scarblast considers this. War boss politics can be brutal, and showing weakness is a good way to end up dead. So what do? We tell him we found a Yumi war machine, but we don't tell him it crumped us. We tell him we fought it to a standstill and it ran away. Then we say we need more boys to finish it off and claim all the loot. That's actually pretty smart. Course it is. I'm a mech boy. Being smart is what I do. Cludget starts heading for the exit. Come on, we got a lot of ground to cover. As they make their way through the ruins, stepping over rubble and dodging unstable structures, Cludget is already designing in his head. He's thinking about the Dreadnought's weapon systems, its armor layout, its power source. He's imagining what he could build if he could just get his hands on that technology. A new kind of Def Dread, bigger and better than anything the mechs have made before. Maybe mount it with a proper force field, like the ones the big mechs make. Add more guns, make it faster. Paint it red so it goes faster and blue so it's lucky. The possibilities are endless. Behind them, in the deepest parts of the ruins, more orc spores are settling into the cracks and crevices of the shattered fortress. The dead orcs are already beginning to decompose, releasing even more spores into the environment. In a few months, there will be orcoid life growing in these ruins. In a few years, there might be full orcs. The cycle continues, eternal and unstoppable. Kill one orc warband, and you've just seeded the area for the next one. But for now, Cludget and Scarblast are the only living orcs in these ruins, and they have a long walk ahead of them. The Dreadnought alone. The ancient warrior emerges from the ruins into dim light that his optical sensors have to adjust to. The star overhead is unfamiliar. The constellations are wrong. Even the color of the sky seems off somehow. None of this matches his memories of this world. Of course, his memories are 7,500 years out of date, so perhaps that's not surprising. He stands at the entrance to what was once the main gate of the fortress monastery, now just a gap in a collapsed wall. His sensors sweep the horizon, looking for any signs of Imperial presence. Landing pads, Vox towers, fortifications, anything that would indicate his chapter still maintains a presence here. There's nothing. Just ruins stretching in every direction. Ancient battlefields turned to dust. The bones of the dead long since scattered by wind and time. His reactor hums softly, the only sound in the silence. He tries his Vox again, cycling through every Imperial frequency he knows. Emergency channels, Space Marine exclusive frequencies, Guard Command networks, Navy coordination bands. Static on all of them. Either his comm systems are damaged beyond his ability to detect, or there's simply no one broadcasting anywhere within range. He accesses his databanks, looking for information about this world, about the sector it's in, about anything that might help him orient himself. The files are there, but they're corrupted. 7,500 years of storage in less than ideal conditions has taken its toll. What he can recover tells him this was a fortress world, strategically important during some conflict that his records don't fully explain. The fortress monastery was established here to maintain Imperial control and counter Xenos threats. That's all standard. But what happened after that? Why the fortress was destroyed? How he ended up buried and forgotten? The files don't say. He needs to make contact with Imperial forces. That's his primary objective now. Find the Imperium, report in, receive new orders. But this world appears to be dead, and without working Vox communications, he has no way to signal for pickup. He could wait here, hope that someone eventually comes to investigate. But that could take months, years, possibly longer. And his power reserves, while substantial, are not infinite. Maintaining his stasis fields and life support for 7,500 years has drained his reactor to perhaps 20% of its normal capacity. He can operate for weeks, maybe even months, but eventually he'll need to find a way to recharge or risk shutting down permanently. The logical course of action is to locate the nearest Imperial settlement and make contact. But he doesn't know where the nearest settlement is. His maps are 7,500 years old. The world he remembers is not the world that exists now. He could walk in any direction and have no idea if he's getting closer to help or walking into a wasteland. His tactical training provides the answer. When lost in hostile territory, with no navigation data, establish a defensive position and gather intelligence. Use whatever resources are available to improve your situation. Wait for opportunities to present themselves. Survival first, mission objectives second. Because a dead Marine serves no one, he returns to the ruins, moving deeper into the areas he hasn't fully explored yet. If this was a fortress monastery, there should be stores of equipment, ammunition, maybe even maintenance facilities that might still have functioning equipment. The Orks wouldn't have had time to loot everything. And while most of it will be degraded after so long, there might be something useful. He finds an armory, or what's left of one. The door was blown open long ago, probably during the battle that destroyed the fortress. Inside, the weapons racks stand empty, already looted by someone. But there are ammunition stores built into the walls, designed to survive all but direct hits from orbital bombardment. He pries one open with his power fist, tearing through ceramite and plasteel like they're made of parchment. Inside are cases of bolt rounds, each one individually sealed in preservative oil, waiting for the day they'd be needed. They're ancient by any standard, but bolts are simple technology. Propellant, shell casing, mass reactive tip. If the seal's held, they should still be functional. He opens one case, examining the rounds with his sensors. They check out. The propellant hasn't degraded. The mass reactive cores are intact. He can use these. His assault cannon uses a slightly different caliber, but he can adapt them. A few hours of careful work with his power fist's built-in tools, and he's modified enough rounds to refill his depleted ammunition storage. It's not as much as he'd like, maybe a few thousand rounds when he'd prefer 10 times that, but it's better than nothing. He finds more supplies as he searches, power cells that still hold charges, repair materials that haven't degraded too badly, even a few weapons that might be salvageable with enough work. There's also a Tech Marines workshop, and while most of the sophisticated equipment is ruined, there are basic tools that he might be able to use for field repairs. As he works, organizing his finds and taking stock of his resources, he's struck by the absolute silence of the place. There should be serfs here, chapter thralls maintaining the fortress even in the absence of the Marines. There should be servitors performing routine tasks. There should be signs of life, of habitation, of ongoing operation. Instead, there's just dust and decay and the slow creep of geological processes reclaiming the works of man. What happened here? Did his chapter abandon this world? Were they destroyed? Did something so catastrophic occur that they had to pull back entirely and leave everything behind? He has no answers, only questions, and the questions multiply the more he thinks about them. His chronometer indicates that approximately 6 hours have passed since he awakened. His power reserves are at 19% and dropping slowly. He estimates he has perhaps 3 weeks of operational time before he'll need to shut down to conserve power. That's not a lot of time to find help. but it's what he has to work with. He's considering his next move when his sensors detect movement on the surface above. Multiple contacts, moving with purpose, heading toward the ruins. His first thought is that the Orks have returned with reinforcements. He readies his weapons, preparing for another fight. But then his sensors provide more detail, and he realizes these aren't Orks. They're human. Unaugmented, baseline humans, judging by their size and thermal signatures. Approximately 20 of them, armed with what his sensors identify as lass weapons and autoguns. They're moving in a tactical formation, suggesting military training or at least combat experience. And they're heading directly toward the ruins, toward his position. The question is whether they're Imperial citizens or something else. Cultists, perhaps. Traitors. Heretics. Or possibly just survivors trying to eke out an existence on a dead world. His first instinct is to reveal himself, to make contact and assess whether they're friendly. But 7,500 years of absence has taught him caution. The Imperium he knew might not be the Imperium that exists now. Better to observe first, make contact second. He finds a position where he can watch without being easily seen, powering down non-essential systems to reduce his thermal and electromagnetic signatures. His optical sensors track the humans as they enter the ruins, moving carefully through the rubble, checking corners and watching for threats. They're definitely experienced. Their movements are professional, coordinated, disciplined. Then he hears them speaking, and his language databases translate their words automatically into Gothic. They're speaking Low Gothic, the common language of Imperial citizens across the galaxy. That's a good sign. The words themselves are even better. Thorson, take your squad and check the eastern quarter. Mara, you've got west. I want this place cleared before nightfall. The governor wants a full report on what's salvageable. Imperial governor. That means Imperial authority. That means there's some form of Imperium still functioning on this world, or at least in this system. That means he's not completely alone after all. The warrior considers his options. He could simply walk out and introduce himself, but Space Marines, especially Dreadnoughts, can be intimidating to normal humans. If he's not careful, they might panic and open fire, and while they couldn't hurt him, he'd rather not start his reintroduction to the Imperium by killing Imperial citizens in self-defense. Better to make contact carefully, deliberately, in a way that gives them time to process what they're seeing. He accesses his Vox systems again, this time tuning to the frequency their squad appears to be using for communications. He keeps his voice low, modulated to sound as unthreatening as a Dreadnought's mechanical voice can sound. Imperial forces, he says, speaking slowly and clearly. This is Brother Dreadnought Venerus of the... He pauses. What chapter was? He. The memories are there, but fragmented. The heraldry on his chassis should tell him, but he can't see it himself. Of the Adeptus Astartes. I mean, you no harm. I require assistance. The effect on the humans is immediate. They freeze in place, weapons coming up, heads swiveling as they try to identify the source of the voice. One of them, presumably the leader based on his position and the way the others look to him, speaks into his Vox unit. This is Captain Hadrian of the Caledon 3rd Reclamation Force. Identify yourself and your position. Are you in distress? Venerus's memory supplies the information. Venerus. That was his name. Brother Venerus, assault specialist, 3rd Company. He'd earned commendations for his actions during something. The memory is there but blurry, the details lost to time and degradation. But at least he knows his name now. That's something. Captain Hadrian, he responds. I am a Dreadnought of the Adeptus Astartes. I have been in stasis for an extended period. I require information about current Imperial dispositions in this sector and, eventually, transportation to the nearest Space Marine facility. There's a long pause. Then Hadrian's voice returns, and there's audible awe in it. A Dreadnought? An actual... My lord, we thought this place was completely dead. How long have you been here? My chronometer indicates approximately 7,500 years. Another pause, longer this time. Venerus can imagine the conversation happening on their private Vox channels, the disbelief, the debates about whether this is real or some kind of trick. Finally, Hadrian speaks again. "My lord, with your permission, we would like to approach your position. We can provide whatever assistance you require." "Permission granted. I'm shutting down my weapons systems as a gesture of good faith. Please approach slowly and do not make any sudden movements. My combat reflexes are well honed." He powers down the assault cannon, keeping his power fist in standby mode just in case. Then he steps out of concealment, moving to a position where the humans can see him clearly. He makes no threatening moves, just stands there, a towering figure of adamantium and ceramite, weapons pointed at the ground, optical sensors glowing softly in the dim light. The humans' reaction when they see him is everything he expected. They stop dead, staring up at him with expressions of mingled fear and wonder. To them, he must look like something from a legend, a relic from the Imperium's past made manifest, and in a sense, that's exactly what he is. Captain Hadrian steps forward slowly, his weapon lowered. He's a middle-aged man, scarred and weathered, with the look of someone who's seen significant combat. When he speaks, his voice is respectful, but steady. "My lord, on behalf of the Caledon Reclamation Force and Governor Maxim Varro, I welcome you back to the service of the Imperium. We are honored beyond measure to have found you. Whatever you need, whatever we can provide, you have only to ask." Venerus's machine voice responds, and if there's relief in it, the humans don't seem to notice through the mechanical distortion. "Captain, I require the following. First, information on current sector status and the whereabouts of any Space Marine forces. Second, communication with my chapter or, if that is not possible, with the nearest Adeptus Astartes facility. Third, eventual transportation off-world. Can you provide these things?" The information, yes. Communication, that may take time. We're a reclamation force, tasked with surveying dead worlds for salvageable resources. Our Vox isn't powerful enough to reach beyond the system, but we can get you to our ship, and from there to the nearest Imperial world with proper astropathic communication. As for transport, Hadrian glances back at his squad, then at Venerus's massive form. "That may be a challenge. Our transport ships aren't designed to carry something of your size, but we'll figure something out." "Time to reach your ship?" 2 days if we push hard, 3 if we move at a more sustainable pace. Venerus runs the calculations. His power reserves can handle that easily, and once he's on their ship, he can potentially access their reactor to recharge. The situation is far from ideal, but it's vastly better than wandering a dead world alone, slowly running out of power and hoping for rescue. "Very well, 2 days. I will accompany you. Lead the way, Captain." As the humans begin organizing for the journey, communicating with their base camp and arranging for additional supplies and transport, Venerus allows himself a moment of something that might be relief. He's made contact. He's found Imperial forces. He's not alone anymore. The path forward is uncertain, and there will be challenges ahead, but at least now he has direction. Behind him, deep in the ruins, the Ork spores continue to grow. Kludgit and Scarblast are making their way back to their warband, preparing to return with reinforcements. The Dreadnought's war is far from over. But for now, for this moment, Venerus has found something he thought he'd lost forever. He's found hope, and in the grim darkness of the far future, hope is the rarest commodity of all. The aftermath. When worlds collide. The meeting between ancient Dreadnought and scavenging Orks represents more than just a violent encounter between Imperium and Xenos. It's a collision of philosophies, technologies, and timelines that reveals fundamental truths about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. When we examine what happens after such an encounter, we begin to understand the larger implications for both sides. From the Imperium's perspective, the recovery of Venerus is both a blessing and a complication. On one hand, he's a living relic, a warrior from the early days of his chapter, with knowledge and experience that spans millennia. His very existence is a connection to the Imperium's past, a reminder of warriors who fought when the galaxy was younger and the Imperium stronger. The tech marines who eventually examine him will find technology and construction techniques that have been lost to time, possibly learning things that could improve modern Dreadnought maintenance and construction. On the other hand, he's severely damaged and degraded. 7,500 years in emergency stasis, even in a well-built sarcophagus, takes its toll. His organic components will have deteriorated despite the preservation systems. His neural pathways will show degradation. His memories will be fragmented and unreliable. The psychological impact of awakening to find that everyone and everything he knew is gone, that he's effectively jumped forward through 7.5 millennia of history, could break even a Space Marine's enhanced mind. The chapter he serves, if it still exists, will face difficult decisions. Do they attempt to restore him fully, knowing that the process might fail, or that he might never fully integrate with the modern chapter? Do they consult him as a living historical resource, mining his memories for any useful tactical or strategic information about enemies or conflicts from his era? Do they give him the Emperor's peace, releasing him from a half-life that has become more curse than honor? There's also the question of what his awakening means for this particular dead world. If Imperial forces have found one intact Dreadnought, might there be others? The reclamation teams will intensify their searches, looking for more relics, more technology, more evidence of what happened here all those millennia ago. And in doing so, they might disturb things better left buried, awaken threats that have been sleeping as long as Veneris has, or attract the attention of enemies who would rather see these relics destroyed than recovered. From the Ork perspective, the situation is equally interesting, but in very different ways. Kludgit and Scarblast, assuming they survive their return journey, will tell their story to their war boss. The details will get exaggerated in the telling, as they always do, but the core truth will remain. There's a Yumi war machine on that dead world, and it's the fightiest, shootiest thing they've ever seen. This information will spread through the WAG like wildfire, because Orks can't keep secrets and wouldn't want to, even if they could. The war boss will have to decide whether to mount an expedition to find and destroy or capture the Dreadnought. On one hand, it killed a lot of his boys, and that demands revenge. On the other hand, it's probably gone by now, moved on with the Imperial forces that recovered it. Is it worth the effort to track it down? Is there enough loot on that world to justify another expedition, even without the Dreadnought? But even if the war boss decides to let it go, other Orks will hear the story. It will travel through the Greenskin network, getting embellished and enhanced with each retelling. Soon, there will be legends about the stompy Yumi ghost that killed 100 Orks single-handed. Young Orks looking to make a name for themselves might seek out similar challenges. Mech boys might become obsessed with replicating the technology they briefly glimpsed. The encounter will ripple outward through Ork culture in ways that are unpredictable and potentially dangerous. And then there's what the Orks left behind. The bodies of dozens of dead Orks, decomposing in the ruins, releasing countless millions of spores into the environment. Within months, the first Orkoid life forms will appear. Within a year, there might be small Orks, primitive and feral but growing. Within a decade, if left unchecked, there could be full-sized Orks running wild on a world the Imperium thought was safely dead. This is the Ork curse. You can never truly eliminate them. Kill them all, and their very deaths seed the area for future infestations. The only way to be absolutely certain is total planetary sterilization, burning the entire world down to the bedrock. And even that isn't foolproof if any spores manage to escape into space, or survive in deep underground pockets. The Imperial Reclamation Forces will have to deal with this threat. They'll need to set up quarantine protocols, regularly patrol the ruins, burn out any Orkoid growth they find. It's a never-ending task, and if they're not diligent, they could lose the world to a new WAG before they even finish cataloguing the salvage. There's also the broader strategic picture to consider. If this world is seeing increased Ork activity, that might indicate a larger WAG moving through the sector. The Imperium will need to assess the threat level, determine if additional forces are required, possibly evacuate the reclamation teams if the danger becomes too severe. One ancient dreadnought, no matter how valuable, isn't worth losing to an Ork invasion. The technology angle is particularly fascinating. What would happen if Kludgit actually managed to get his hands on proper dreadnought schematics or components? Ork mech boys have an instinctive understanding of technology, and while they can't replicate sophisticated Imperial designs exactly, they can create crude but functional approximations. A mech boy, working with dreadnought technology, might develop new types of def dreads or killer khans, incorporating elements of Imperial design into their own ramshackle creations. Imagine a def dread with an assault cannon that actually works reliably instead of jamming every few shots, or a killer khan with proper power field generators instead of the crude force fields mech boys usually manage. The Orks wouldn't understand why these improvements work. They'd just know that the Yumi tech makes their machines better, and they'd start incorporating it wherever they could. This has happened before in Warhammer 40,000 lore. The Orks are infamous looters, and some of their most effective weapons and vehicles are cobbled together from captured Imperial technology. Looted Lehman Russ tanks, rhinos converted into troop carriers, even rumors of looted Titans modified beyond recognition but still functional. If the Dreadnought's technology falls into Ork hands, even fragments of it, the Imperium might face a new generation of Ork war machines that are significantly more dangerous than what came before. There's also the question of what this encounter teaches both sides about their enemies. Venerus, despite his 7,500-year sleep, encountered Orks and responded exactly as his training dictated. Assess the threat, eliminate it efficiently, pursue survivors to prevent them from regrouping. It's a textbook response, one that any Space Marine would recognize and approve. But the Orks he fought were modern Orks, possibly with equipment and tactics that didn't exist in his time. Did he learn anything from the encounter? Did he observe new weapons, new organizational structures, new behaviors that might indicate how Orks have evolved over the millennia? Similarly, the Orks who survived, brief though their encounter was, experienced something that most Orks never do. They fought an enemy that was completely beyond their ability to defeat through normal means. No amount of charging or shooting or bellowing made any difference. The Dreadnought was simply too tough, too well armed, too experienced. For most Orks, this would just mean they need more boys next time. But for the smarter ones, like Kludgit, it might inspire genuine innovation. If brute force doesn't work, what will? Better tactics, bigger guns, specialized equipment designed specifically to crack open armored targets. The psychological impact on both sides is worth considering as well. For Venerus, the encounter was probably oddly reassuring. Orks may have changed in the 7,500 years he slept, but they're still fundamentally Orks. Still green, still violent, still responding to overwhelming force with more violence. In a galaxy that has transformed beyond recognition, fighting Orks is something familiar, something he can understand. It's a small comfort, but in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, you take comfort where you can find it. For the surviving Orks, the experience will become part of their oral history, their mythology. They'll tell the story around campfires, embellishing and exaggerating until the Dreadnought becomes a legend. The great stompy ghost of the dead world, they'll call it, and young Orks will listen with wide eyes and dream of the day they'll be big enough and tough enough to fight such a monster themselves. And in the end, that might be the most important consequence of all, because the Orks will be back. Not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. They'll return to that dead world, looking for the Dreadnought, looking for more loot, looking for a fight. And if they find what they're looking for, if they encounter Imperial forces or more ancient relics or anything else worth fighting over, the cycle will continue. Because in Warhammer 40,000, the only constant is war. Ancient dreadnoughts wake from millennial slumbers to find the galaxy still burning. Orks die by the thousands, and their deaths seed new generations to fight new wars. The Imperium struggles to reclaim what it's lost while defending against enemies that never stop coming. Round and round it goes, an endless cycle of conflict and carnage, hope and despair, sacrifice and survival. The Dreadnought and the Orks are just two small parts of this vast machine, this galaxy-spanning war that has raged for 10,000 years and shows no signs of ending. But their encounter, brief and violent as it was, encapsulates everything that makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling. The meeting of past and present, the collision of order and chaos. The fundamental truth that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Alternative scenarios. What could have been? Before we reach our conclusion, it's worth exploring the other ways this encounter could have unfolded. The scenario we've followed, where the Dreadnought awakens, destroys most of the Orks, and is eventually recovered by Imperial forces, is just one possibility among many. The variables are numerous, and even small changes in circumstances could lead to radically different outcomes. Let's examine some of these alternative paths and what they reveal about the nature of both Dreadnoughts and Orks. Scenario 1. The Orks successfully loot the Dreadnought before it awakens. This is perhaps the most terrifying outcome from the Imperium's perspective. Imagine if Kludget and his crew had been more cautious, more methodical in their approach. Instead of immediately trying to crack open the Dreadnought, they carefully cut through its external systems, disabling the automatic awakening protocols before the pilot can return to consciousness. They might use crude but effective methods, jamming scraps of metal into sensor arrays, cutting power lines, physically preventing the systems from activating. With the Dreadnought effectively lobotomized, the Orks could then take their time dissecting it. The pilot inside, still in stasis, would never know what was happening, as greenskin hands pried apart the machinery, keeping him alive. The sarcophagus itself might be treated as just another piece of loot, carted off to a mech boy's workshop, where it would be examined, prodded, and eventually either discarded or repurposed into something entirely different. The technology, however, would be invaluable. An intact Dreadnought chassis, even one that's 7,500 years old, represents a treasure trove of advanced Imperial engineering. The assault cannon alone could be reverse engineered, or more accurately, crudely copied by Ork mech boys, who would create their own versions that work just well enough to be dangerous. The Power Fist technology might inspire new close combat weapons for Def Dreads. The reactor could be studied and its principles, if the Orks can grasp them even partially, applied to their own vehicles. Within months, you might see new Ork war machines incorporating elements of Dreadnought design. Def Dreads with more sophisticated targeting systems. Killer Khans with improved armor layouts. The changes would be subtle at first, but over time, as the innovations spread through the WAG, they could make Ork forces significantly more dangerous. The Imperium would notice eventually, as they always do when Ork technology takes a sudden leap forward, but by then, the damage would be done. There's also the question of what happens to the pilot. If the Orks somehow manage to extract the Space Marine from his sarcophagus while he's still alive, the possibilities are grim. Orks have been known to keep trophies of particularly impressive enemies. A Space Marine, especially one entombed in a Dreadnought, would be considered the ultimate prize. The Orks might keep him alive, conscious, as a kind of living testament to their victory. They might even try to communicate with him, in their crude way, asking questions about Imperial technology or tactics. The psychological horror of such an existence, trapped and helpless in the hands of Xenos, might be enough to drive even a Space Marine insane. Scenario 2. The Dreadnought awakens but is overwhelmed by superior Ork numbers. Our narrative followed a relatively small Ork warband, perhaps 100 strong at most. But what if the Orks who found the Dreadnought were part of a much larger Wah! What if there were thousands of Orks in the ruins, with hundreds more within calling distance? The Dreadnought is formidable, but it's not invincible. Concentrated fire from dozens of heavy weapons could wear down even adamantium armor. Power claws wielded by Ork knobs could tear through damaged sections. And if enough Orks simply dogpile the Dreadnought, using their bodies as living shields while others work to disable its weapons and mobility, eventually even a Space Marine's tactical genius would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. In this scenario, the Dreadnought might fight valiantly, might kill hundreds of Orks before finally falling, but the end result would be the same. The chassis would be captured, likely badly damaged, but potentially repairable by Ork standards. The pilot would either die in battle or be captured alive, and the Orks would have a story to tell for generations about how they brought down a Yumi war machine through cunning and superior numbers. The aftermath would be similar to the first scenario, with Ork technology improving through incorporation of looted Dreadnought components, but there would be an additional element. The Orks would have proven to themselves that Dreadnoughts can be beaten. This knowledge would spread, and future encounters between Orks and Dreadnoughts would see the Greenskins employing specific anti-Dreadnought tactics. They might develop specialized weapons designed to crack open armored walkers. They might train specific squads in how to disable Dreadnoughts quickly and efficiently. The Imperium's Dreadnoughts, already precious and irreplaceable, would become even more vulnerable. Scenario 3. The Dreadnought awakens damaged and unable to fight effectively. 7.5 millennia is a long time, even for technology as robust as a Dreadnought chassis. What if, when the awakening sequence initiated, critical systems failed? What if the assault cannon's ammunition feed jammed permanently? What if the power fist's actuators seized up? What if the locomotion systems only partially activated, leaving the Dreadnought mobile but slow and unbalanced? In this scenario, the Dreadnought would awaken to find itself crippled, facing enemies it cannot effectively fight. The pilot might try to bluff, hoping the Orks will flee from the reputation of what a Dreadnought should be capable of. But Orks are remarkably quick to recognize when something isn't as dangerous as it appears. They would close in, testing the Dreadnought's defenses, probing for weaknesses, and when they discovered how limited its ability to fight back really was, they would attack with renewed enthusiasm. The pilot's only option might be to try to self-destruct, denying the Orks their prize and ensuring his own death rather than capture. But even this might not work if the self-destruct systems are among those that have failed. The pilot could find himself trapped in a slowly dying machine, unable to fight, unable to flee, unable even to end his own suffering. It would be a fate worse than death, and exactly the kind of grim irony that defines the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Scenario 4. The Dreadnought and Orks reach an unexpected accommodation. This is perhaps the most unlikely scenario, but not entirely impossible. Orks respect strength above all else, and a Dreadnought that proves itself in battle earns that respect whether it's Imperial or not. There are precedents in the lore for Orks accepting guests who have proven themselves worthy. Imagine if, after the initial combat, the surviving Ork warboss decides that killing the Dreadnought isn't worth the cost in boys. Instead, he offers a deal. The Dreadnought can go free, or even join the WAG, temporarily, if it proves itself in battle against the Orks' enemies. This kind of pragmatic arrangement is very un-Imperial, and most Space Marines would refuse it on principle. But a Dreadnought pilot who's been isolated for 7,500 years might have a different perspective. If the pilot is desperate enough, confused enough, or simply pragmatic enough to accept, you could have the bizarre scenario of an Imperial Dreadnought fighting alongside Orks against whatever enemies they're currently warring against. The pilot might rationalize it as using the Orks as temporary allies against greater threats, or as gathering intelligence about Ork tactics and organization for when he eventually returns to Imperial service. The Orks, meanwhile, would simply think it's hilarious that a Yumi is fighting with them, and they'd place bets on how long it takes before the Dreadnought tries to betray them. Such an arrangement couldn't last long. Eventually, the Dreadnought would find a way to escape, or the Orks would decide that killing the Yumi is more fun than keeping it around, or Imperial forces would arrive and the situation would resolve itself through violence. But for however long it lasted, it would be one of the stranger alliances in a galaxy full of strange alliances. Scenario 5. The encounter triggers a much larger conflict. The dead world where the Dreadnought sleeps might not be as isolated as it appears. Perhaps there are other Imperial forces in the system, monitoring for any signs of activity. Perhaps there are Ork forces nearby, part of a larger WAG that's moving through the sector. When the Dreadnought awakens and begins broadcasting distress signals, or when the Orks who escaped start calling for reinforcements, the situation could escalate rapidly. What begins as a small skirmish between one Dreadnought and a few dozen Orks could explode into a full-scale battle involving hundreds of combatants on both sides. The Imperial forces might send down Space Marines to retrieve their ancient brother, only to find themselves fighting not just against the Orks who originally discovered the Dreadnought, but against entire mobs of greenskins attracted by the promise of a good fight. The battle could rage across the entire dead world, with the ruins of the fortress monastery becoming a key strategic objective for both sides. In this scenario, the Dreadnought becomes less of an active participant and more of an objective to be secured. Both sides want it, the Imperium to recover it and the Orks to loot it, but neither can get to it while the other is fighting to stop them. The result could be a prolonged campaign that draws in more and more forces, turning a dead world into a very active war zone. By the time the dust settles, the world might be so devastated that neither side can claim victory, and the Dreadnought itself might be damaged beyond recovery in the crossfire. Each of these scenarios reveals different aspects of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The first shows how Ork scavenging can lead to technological proliferation that threatens the Imperium. The second demonstrates that even the mightiest Imperial weapons can be overwhelmed by sufficient numbers. The third illustrates the tragic vulnerability of ancient technology in a galaxy where proper maintenance is increasingly impossible. The fourth explores the grey areas where necessity and pragmatism can create unlikely alliances. And the fifth shows how small encounters can escalate into major conflicts when the strategic situation is right. The scenario we followed in our main narrative, where the Dreadnought successfully fights off the Orks and is recovered by Imperial forces, is optimistic by Warhammer 40,000 standards. It's not a happy ending, because there are no happy endings in the grim darkness of the far future, but it's about as close as you can get. The ancient warrior survives. He'll be returned to service, or at least honored for his sacrifice. The Orks are defeated, at least temporarily. The Imperium recovers valuable technology and knowledge. These are victories, small though they may be, but they're fragile victories, dependent on circumstances aligning just right. Change any one variable, and the outcome shifts dramatically. The Orks arrive in greater numbers, or with better weapons, or with a war boss smart enough to coordinate an effective attack, and suddenly the Dreadnought's survival is no longer guaranteed. The Imperial forces arrive too late, or not at all, or turn out to be something other than loyal servants of the Emperor, and the Dreadnought's fate becomes uncertain. The technology fails at a critical moment. The pilot's damaged psyche makes poor decisions. Random chance intervenes in any of 1,000 ways, and everything changes. This uncertainty, this sense that even the most seemingly assured outcomes can be derailed by the slightest shift in circumstances, is part of what makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling. Nothing is guaranteed. Victory is never certain. The hero might survive, or they might not, and either way, the galaxy keeps turning, uncaring of individual fates no matter how significant they might seem to the individuals involved. The Dreadnought could have been destroyed, could have been captured, could have fought alongside the very enemies it was designed to destroy, could have triggered a war that consumed the entire sector. Any of these outcomes was possible, and in other timelines, other versions of this same basic scenario, they probably happened. But in our timeline, the one we've been following, the ancient warrior survived to fight another day, and that, in the grim darkness of the far future, is about the best you can hope for. Conclusion. Echoes of eternity. What happens when Orks find a Dreadnought that's been asleep for 7,500 years? The answer, as we've explored, is complicated, violent, and utterly emblematic of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It's a story of ancient warriors awakening to a galaxy they no longer recognize, of green-skinned scavengers stumbling upon power beyond their comprehension, of the eternal dance between the Imperium's reverence for the past and the Orks' irreverent embrace of the present. The Dreadnought, that walking tomb of a long-dead hero, represents everything the Imperium holds sacred. Tradition, sacrifice, the belief that some warriors are too valuable to let die. The pilot inside has given everything for the Emperor, his body broken beyond repair, his identity slowly eroding as the centuries pass, but still he serves, still he fights, because that's what Space Marines do. They endure, they persevere, they never surrender, never give up, never stop serving humanity, even when humanity has moved on and forgotten them. The Orks represent the opposite philosophy. They don't care about tradition, except as something to mock. They don't revere the past, except as a source of loot. They don't think about sacrifice or duty, or any of the high-minded concepts that drive the Imperium. They just want to fight and loot and fight some more. And yet, in their own crude way, they're just as eternal as the Imperium. Kill them all, and more will grow from their spores. Defeat them completely, and they'll come back stronger. They're a force of nature, as inevitable as entropy, as unstoppable as time itself. When these two forces meet, when ancient nobility collides with primal savagery, the result is exactly what you'd expect from Warhammer 40,000. Violence, death, bloodshed on a scale that would horrify normal humans, but is just another Tuesday in the grim darkness of the far future. The Dreadnought awakens and immediately goes to war, because that's what it was built for, what it's been maintained for across millennia. The Orks attack with wild abandon, because fighting is what they live for, the only thing they truly understand. And when the smoke clears and the bodies are counted, what has changed? The Dreadnought has survived, but at what cost? How much of the warrior inside remains after 7,500 years of sleep and degradation? How much more has been lost in this latest battle? This reminder that the galaxy he once knew is gone and will never return. The Orks have been defeated, but they've also spread their spores across another world, seeding it for future conflicts. Klugit has seen technology that might inspire new and dangerous innovations. The cycle continues, as it always does, as it always will. This is what makes Warhammer 40,000 so compelling. It's not a universe where good triumphs over evil or where heroes save the day. It's a universe where everyone is struggling just to survive, where victory is temporary and defeat is educational, where the best you can hope for is to die well and maybe, if you're very lucky, be remembered for it. The Dreadnought will serve until it's destroyed, and then it will be placed in the chapter's mausoleum, and another warrior will take its place. The Orks will keep fighting because fighting is what they do, and if they learn something from this encounter, they'll just become more dangerous next time. There's a dark poetry to it all. The ancient warrior preserved in metal and machinery, technically alive, but more dead than living, fighting wars that have no end for an Imperium that's slowly dying. The savage Xenos, whose very nature makes them impossible to truly defeat, who laugh at death and welcome battle, who find joy in the carnage that makes normal beings recoil in horror. They're two sides of the same coin, two different responses to the fundamental truth of the 40k universe. Life is suffering, and the only way through it is to keep fighting. For the Dreadnought pilot, there's no retirement, no peaceful end, no chance to rest until he's earned it. There's just the next battle, and the one after that, and the one after that, stretching forward into an endless future of war. Every awakening takes something from him. Every battle erodes another piece of what he was. Eventually, there will be nothing left but the machine, still fighting, still serving, but empty of anything that could be called human. And even then, even when he's more ghost than man, he'll continue to serve, because that's what he swore to do, and Space Marines never break their oaths. For the Orks, there's no grand tragedy, no slow decay into nothingness. There's just the eternal now, the immediate moment of violence and excitement, the simple pleasure of a good fight. They don't worry about the future or mourn the past. They exist in the present, always and forever, finding joy in battle and satisfaction in survival. And when they die, as all Orks eventually do, they spawn the next generation to carry on the fight. It's a kind of immortality, crude and brutal, but effective. The individual Ork may die, but the species endures, eternal and unchanging. And somewhere between these two extremes, the Imperium tries to hold together a galaxy that's been falling apart for 10,000 years. It venerates the past while building for a future it knows will never come. It preserves ancient warriors in walking tombs while sending billions of normal humans to die in wars that accomplish nothing. It fights against entropy and chaos and xenos and heretics and demons, and its own internal decay, all at the same time, knowing that it's a losing battle but fighting anyway because what else is there to do? This encounter between Dreadnought and Orks, this moment of violence in the ruins of a forgotten world, is a microcosm of the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. It's ancient versus modern, order versus chaos, humanity versus alien, technology versus biology, purpose versus instinct. And the answer to who wins is always the same: nobody. The Dreadnought survives but loses more of itself. The Orks are defeated but spread their spores. The Imperium recovers a relic but faces new threats. The galaxy keeps turning, the wars keep raging, and nothing ever really changes except that everything gets a little bit worse. That's the grim darkness of the far future. That's what makes Warhammer 40,000 unique among science fiction universes. It's not about hope or progress or the triumph of the human spirit. It's about endurance in the face of hopelessness, fighting when you know you can't win, serving a purpose that might be meaningless but is all you have. It's about ancient warriors waking from millennial sleep to find that the galaxy is still at war, that nothing has improved, that the best they can hope for is to fight and die well. It's about Orks treating the entire cosmos as their personal playground, fighting for the sheer joy of it, unconcerned with victory or defeat, because the fight itself is the point. And somehow, in this universe of unrelenting grimness, we find stories worth telling. Stories about honor and duty, about sacrifice and perseverance, about finding purpose in a purposeless universe. The Dreadnought that sleeps for 7,500 years and wakes to fight again is a story about never giving up, even when everything you knew is gone. The Orks who stumble upon ancient technology and try to loot it are a story about finding joy in the moment, about living life with absolute conviction even when that life is brutal and short. These stories resonate because they're fundamentally human, even when the characters are posthuman warriors in metal shells or green-skinned fungal aliens. We understand the Dreadnaught's struggle to maintain identity in the face of endless war. We understand the Orcs' desire to live life to the fullest, consequences be damned. We see ourselves in these characters, our own struggles writ large across a galaxy-spanning canvas of war and death and survival against impossible odds. So when you ask what happens when Orks find a Dreadnought that's been asleep for 7,500 years, the answer is exactly what you'd expect, and yet somehow more than that. Violence erupts, deaths occur. The ancient and the immediate collide with devastating effect. But beyond the bloodshed, beyond the tactical considerations and strategic implications, there's something deeper. There's the fundamental truth about what it means to endure in a universe that doesn't care whether you live or die, that will grind you down regardless of how strong you are or how hard you fight. And in that truth, in that grim understanding of reality's fundamental nature, we find the dark heart of Warhammer 40,000. The Dreadnought will fight on, because that's what it does. The Orks will return, because that's what they do. The galaxy will keep turning, the wars will keep raging, and in 10,000 years, maybe some other ancient warrior will wake from a long sleep to find that nothing has changed and everything is different. And the cycle will continue, eternal and unbreakable, in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what happens when ancient Imperial technology meets Orc scavenging instinct, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are countless more stories to tell in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, from the heights of heroism to the depths of horror, and we're going to explore them all. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but at least it makes for good stories.